In the pre-dawn darkness of June 19th, 1944, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa stands on the flag bridge of the carrier Taiho, the newest and most powerful flattop in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Around him, in the Philippine Sea, 8 more carriers steam in formation, their decks crowded with aircraft being prepared for launch. Mechanics make final adjustments to Zero fighters. Ordnance crews load bombs onto naval dive bombers and torpedoes onto Kate attack planes, never to rise again. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Below decks, hundreds of young pilots sit in ready rooms, their faces a mixture of determination and barely concealed anxiety. Many have fewer than 3 months of flight training. Some have never fired their guns in combat. They clutch photographs of families they may never see again, tucking them into flight suits as good luck, charms. They have been told this will be the decisive battle, the moment when Japan's combined fleet will crush American naval power in the Pacific. What they do not know is that they are about to fly into the most catastrophic defeat in the history of naval aviation. 300 miles to the east, 15 American carriers are already launching their own aircraft. Hundreds of Grumman Hellcats roar down flight decks, their powerful engines drowning out the sounds of the sea. American radar operators track the incoming Japanese formations while they are still beyond visual range, vectoring interceptors to optimal ambush positions. And in the operations rooms of Task Force 58, staff officers study intelligence reports that reveal every detail of Japan's battle plan, captured when a Japanese admiral's plane crashed in the Philippines 2 months earlier. The Americans are not merely ready, they are waiting. Over the next 48 hours, Japan will commit 9 aircraft, carriers, and over 400 carrier-based aircraft to what Admiral Soemu Toyoda, commander of the combined fleet, calls the battle upon which the fate of the empire rests. But instead of the decisive victory Japanese naval doctrine has promised for decades, Ozawa's mobile fleet will suffer losses so severe that Japanese carrier aviation will cease to exist as an effective fighting force. 3 carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hio, will slip beneath the waves. Nearly 600 aircraft, counting both carrier and land-based planes, will be destroyed. More than 400 aviators, many of them the last trained pilots Japan has left, will die in flames or drown in the vast Pacific. This is the story of the Battle of the Philippine Sea, known to American pilots as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. It is the story of how Japan's last desperate gamble to halt the American advance became instead the moment when the rising sun of Japanese naval aviation finally set, never to rise again. It is early June 1944, and across the Pacific, the tide of war has turned decisively against Japan. The string of victories that began at Pearl Harbor in December 1941, victories that carried Japanese forces across Southeast Asia, through the Philippines, and deep into the Pacific, has long since ended. The disaster at Midway in June 1942 cost Japan 4 fleet carriers and the strategic initiative. The grinding attrition of the Solomon Islands campaign throughout 1942 and 43 consumed hundreds of irreplaceable pilots and aircraft. Now, American forces are advancing relentlessly westward through the Central Pacific, capturing the Gilbert Islands in November 1943 and the Marshall Islands in February 1944. For Japanese military planners, the next American objective is clear and terrifying. The Mariana Islands, Saipan, Tinian, and Guam lie just 1,500 miles south of Tokyo. If these islands fall, American B-29 Superfortress bombers will be able to reach the Japanese home islands with devastating payloads. Worse still, the loss of the Marianas will breach Japan's inner defensive perimeter, opening the door to the Philippines and ultimately to Japan itself. The Marianas must be held at any cost. In Tokyo, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, who assumed command of the combined fleet after Admiral Minechi Koga died in a plane crash in March, finalizes the plan that he believes will reverse Japan's fortunes. Operation Eigo calls for a decisive naval engagement that will destroy American carrier power in a single massive battle. This concept, the Kantai Kessen or decisive battle, has been the cornerstone of Japanese naval strategy for 40 years. The idea is simple and seductive. Lure the American fleet into waters where Japanese land-based aircraft can supplement carrier air power. Attack in overwhelming force. Sink the American carriers. Force the United States to sue for peace. But Operation Ago is built on foundations that have already crumbled. The first crack in the plan emerges in March 1944 when Admiral Koga's plane flies into a typhoon while evacuating Palau ahead of an American carrier raid. The plane crashes in the Philippines, killing Koga and his chief of staff. Filipino guerrillas recover a briefcase from the wreckage containing the complete operational plans for what the Japanese call the Z Plan, Koga's blueprint for the decisive battle. Within weeks, these documents are in American hands, photographed, translated, and distributed to fleet commanders. Admiral Chester Nimitz knows exactly what the Japanese intend to do. The second flaw lies in the quality of Japan's remaining pilots. The Imperial Japanese Navy entered the war with perhaps the finest naval aviators in the world, men with thousands of hours of flight time and years of combat experience in China. But by June 1944, most of these veterans are dead. They died over the Coral Sea, at Midway, in the murderous air battles above Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands. Japan's pilot training program, which before the war took 2 years to produce a combat-ready aviator, has been compressed to as little as 3 months. Young men who should still be learning basic flight maneuvers are instead being rushed to the fleet with minimal gunnery training and almost no formation flying experience. Lieutenant Zenji Abe, one of the few surviving veterans assigned to the carrier Zuikaku, watches the new pilots with growing despair. In his diary, he writes, "These boys are not ready. They can barely land on the carrier deck in calm seas. How will they survive combat against experienced American pilots? We are sending them to their deaths." The third critical weakness is intelligence, or rather, the complete lack of it. Japanese commanders operate in near total darkness regarding American capabilities and intentions. They do not know that American submarines are tracking their every movement. They do not know that American codebreakers can read their radio traffic. They do not know that the Americans have developed radar-directed fighter interception into a devastating science. And most critically, they vastly underestimate the number and quality of American aircraft and pilots. Admiral Ozawa, who will lead the mobile fleet into battle, is a competent and experienced officer, but he is basing his strategy on fatally flawed assumptions. He believes he can launch his aircraft from beyond the range of American counterstrikes, allowing his planes to hit American carriers, then land at Japanese-held airfields in Guam and the Marianas to refuel and rearm before flying back to their carriers. This shuttle bombing technique would, in theory, allow him to strike the Americans repeatedly while keeping his own carriers out of danger. What Ozawa does not know is that American carriers will launch preemptive strikes against those Guam airfields starting June 11th, destroying most of the land-based aircraft he is counting on for support. He does not know that American submarines have already spotted his fleet and are trailing it, reporting its position, course, and speed. And he does not know that Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding the American Fifth Fleet, has no intention of chasing the Japanese carriers but will instead remain near Saipan, forcing Ozawa to come to him. The mobile fleet that Ozawa assembles is impressive on paper but hollowed out by years of attrition. He has 9 carriers, the largest concentration of Japanese carrier power since Midway. At the fleet's heart are 3 heavy carriers. Taiho, brand new, displacing 33,000 tons. Armored flight deck, carrying 75 aircraft, is Ozawa's flagship. Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and a dozen battles, carries 72 aircraft. And Zuikaku, Shokaku's sister ship and the last surviving carrier from the Pearl Harbor attack, also carries 72 aircraft. These 3 fleet carriers represent the elite of Japanese naval aviation. Supporting them are 6 light carriers, Junyo and Hio, converted ocean liners carrying 48 aircraft each, and 4 smaller light carriers, Ryuho, Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zuiho, carrying between 25 and 30 aircraft each. In total, Ozawa has 430 aircraft aboard his carriers. Additionally, he expects support from Vice Admiral Kakuji Kakuta's land-based First Air Fleet, supposedly 540 aircraft stationed across the Marianas, Philippines, and Caroline Islands. On paper, this force appears formidable. Nearly 1,000 aircraft, the decisive superiority Japanese doctrine calls for, but the reality is far different. Many of Ozawa's carrier aircraft are obsolete. The vaunted Mitsubishi Zero, which terrorized Allied pilots in 1941 and 42, is now outclassed by newer American fighters. It lacks armor, protection, self-sealing fuel tanks, and sufficient firepower. The H-Eval dive bomber and Nakajima Kate torpedo bomber, also veterans of Pearl Harbor, are slow and vulnerable to modern anti-aircraft fire. More critically, the pilots flying these aircraft are poorly trained and inexperienced. Many have never seen combat. Some have as little as 3 months of flight training compared to the 2 years of training American naval aviators receive. They have minimal night flying experience, poor formation discipline, and inadequate gunnery skills. They are, in essence, sacrificial pawns being sent against battle-hardened American veterans flying superior aircraft. The morale among these young pilots is a complicated mixture of fatalism and false confidence. The Japanese military culture emphasizes spiritual strength, Bushido, the way of the warrior. They have been told repeatedly that their fighting spirit, their willingness to die for the emperor, will overcome any material disadvantage. Many genuinely believe this. Others, especially the few surviving veterans, know better, but cannot speak openly without being accused of defeatism. Petty Officer First Class Kiyoshi Sato, a dive bomber pilot aboard Shokaku, writes a final letter to his family before the fleet departs. Mother, Father, I go now to strike the Americans with all my strength. If I do not return, please know that I died doing my duty for our sacred homeland. But I must confess, in my heart I fear we are not prepared for what awaits us. The Americans have grown strong while we have grown weak. Still, I will fight with all my spirit. Perhaps that will be enough. It will not be. In contrast, the American force awaiting them is a juggernaut of industrial might and tactical excellence. Task Force 58, commanded by Vice Admiral Mark Mitcher, comprises 15 carriers, 7 fleet carriers, and 8 light carriers, carrying more than 900 aircraft. Supporting them are 7 modern battleships, 8 heavy cruisers, 13 light cruisers, and 58 destroyers. Additionally, Admiral Raymond Spruance, overall commander of the 5th Fleet, has positioned 28 submarines to screen and scout for the Japanese fleet. The American carriers are marvels of modern naval engineering. The Essex-class fleet carriers, Iowa, Intrepid, Lexington, Bunker Hill, Wasp, Hornet, and Yorktown, are purpose-built fighting machines, displacing 27,000 tons each and carrying up to 100 aircraft. The Independence-class light carriers, while smaller, are fast and modern, perfect for supplementing the striking power of the fleet carriers. Unlike Japanese carriers with enclosed hangars that trap fires and explosions, American carriers feature semi-open hangar designs that allow damage to vent overboard. But the real American advantage lies in their aircraft and pilots. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighter, introduced in 1943, is specifically designed to counter the Zero. It is faster, more heavily armed with 650 caliber machine guns, better armored, and more durable. A Zero pilot who gets on a Hellcat's tail might shoot it full of holes only to watch it keep flying. A Hellcat pilot who catches a Zero needs only a short burst to set the lightly built Japanese fighter aflame. American pilots are superbly trained, with an average of 2 years of flight instruction before reaching the fleet. They have been drilled in formation tactics, particularly the thach weave, a mutual support technique where pairs of fighters protect each other's tails. They have extensive gunnery training, night flying experience, and most importantly, many have combat experience from previous campaigns. They know their aircraft's capabilities and limitations. They understand air combat as both an individual skill and a team effort. Moreover, the Americans possess technological advantages that Japanese commanders do not fully appreciate. American radar can detect incoming aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 miles, providing early warning that allows fighters to climb to optimal altitude and position. Radio communication is reliable and clear, allowing fleet controllers to vector fighters precisely onto enemy formations. And most devastatingly, American ships are equipped with the VT proximity fuse, a top-secret development that allows anti-aircraft shells to explode when they sense an aircraft nearby rather than requiring a direct hit. This technology will turn American anti-aircraft fire into a wall of steel that Japanese aircraft cannot penetrate. On June 6, 1944, the same day Allied forces storm the beaches of Normandy, Task Force 58 departs the Marshall Islands heading west toward the Marianas. The invasion force for Saipan follows, 535 ships carrying over 127,000 Marines and soldiers. Admiral Spruance's orders are clear: protect the invasion force. Establish air superiority over the Marianas, and if the Japanese fleet comes out, destroy it. On June 11th, Task Force 58 launches its opening strike. 208 Hellcat fighters and 8 Avenger torpedo bombers sweep over Saipan, Tinian, and Guam, attacking Japanese airfields. The American pilots encounter minimal opposition. Most of Vice Admiral Kakuta's First Air Fleet has already been diverted to support operations in New Guinea, leaving the Marianas dangerously weakened. Over the next 3 days, American fighters destroy more than 150 Japanese aircraft on the ground and in the air, reducing Kakuta's force to a shadow of what Ozawa expects to find. On June 15th, Marines storm ashore on Saipan. The invasion that Japan must stop at any cost has begun. In Tokyo, Admiral Toyoda issues the execution order for Operation Eigo. The fate of the empire, he signals, rests on this one battle. The mobile fleet, anchored at Tawi-Tawi in the southern Philippines, immediately begins preparing for sea. The anchorage at Tawi-Tawi is remote and relatively secure from American air attack, but it is far from ideal. There are no maintenance facilities, forcing carriers to sortie for flight training. The surrounding waters are infested with American submarines. Already, several Japanese ships have been damaged by submarine attacks. More ominously, American submarines have spotted and tracked the mobile fleet from the moment it arrived at Tawi-Tawi. Every movement Ozawa makes is being reported to American Fleet Headquarters. On June 13th, Ozawa's 9 carriers, escorted by 5 battleships, 11 cruisers, and 28 destroyers, depart Tawi-Tawi heading northeast toward the Philippine Sea. The fleet steams in 3 groups. Force A, led by Ozawa aboard Taiho, includes the 3 heavy carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Zuikaku, screened by heavy cruisers and destroyers. Force B, under Rear Admiral Takagi Joshima, consists of the carriers Junyo, Hio, and Ryuho, escorted by a battleship and 9 destroyers. Force C, commanded by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, contains the light carriers Chitose, Chiyoda, and Zueho, protected by 4 battleships, including the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, 5 cruisers, and 8 destroyers. The plan is for Force C, with its heavy anti-aircraft armament, to steam ahead as a vanguard, absorbing and defeating any American air attacks before they reach the precious carriers. Behind them, Forces A and B will launch their own strikes, overwhelming the Americans with mass attacks. Ozawa intends to begin launching aircraft at dawn on June 19th from a distance of 400 miles, beyond the range of American carrier aircraft, or so he believes. But American submarines USS Flying Fish and USS Seahorse spot the mobile fleet as it passes through the Philippine Sea. They shadow the Japanese force, reporting its composition, course, and speed. Admiral Spruance knows exactly where Ozawa is and where he is heading. On June 18th, Spruance positions Task Force 58 west of Saipan, between the invasion beaches and the approaching Japanese fleet. He will not chase Ozawa. He will make Ozawa come to him. That evening, Ozawa's force refuels from oilers, using unrefined Tarakan crude oil. This fuel, while usable, is volatile and dangerous, filling ships with flammable fumes that proper refining would eliminate. This decision to use unrefined fuel will have catastrophic consequences. After refueling, Ozawa turns east, heading toward what he believes will be his decisive victory. His pilots sleep fitfully, knowing tomorrow will bring battle. Aboard the American carriers, the mood is confident but focused. Pilots attend final briefings. Intelligence officers describe the expected Japanese formations and tactics. Fighter directors explain the radar-controlled interception procedures. Maintenance crews conduct final checks on aircraft. Everyone knows the Japanese are coming. Everyone is ready. In the ready room of Fighting Squadron 16 aboard USS Lexington, Lieutenant Alexander Vrasiu listens to the briefing with quiet intensity. Already an ace with multiple kills, Vrasiu is one of the most skilled fighter pilots in the Navy. Tomorrow, he will add 6 more Japanese aircraft to his tally in a single engagement. Around him, other pilots joke nervously, trying to ease the tension. But beneath the banter is steel. These men know their aircraft, trust their training, and believe in their mission. As darkness falls on June 18th, 2 fleets steam toward collision. One is experienced, well-trained, technologically superior, and knows exactly where its enemy is. The other is inexperienced, poorly prepared, technologically outmatched, and operating blindly. The stage is set for what will become the most one-sided carrier battle in history. In his quarters aboard Taiho, Admiral Ozawa studies his charts one final time. He believes he has over 1,000 aircraft to throw at the Americans. He believes his shuttle bombing tactic will allow him to strike repeatedly without exposing his carriers to counterattack. He believes the fighting spirit of his pilots will overcome any American advantages. He is wrong on every count, but he will not realize this until his carriers are burning and hundreds of his pilots are dead. The pre-dawn darkness of June 19th begins like any other at sea. Gentle swells, warm tropical air, stars visible through scattered clouds. In a few hours, this peaceful scene will transform into a maelstrom of fire, steel, and death. The Battle of the Philippine Sea is about to begin. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. At 0400 hours on June 19th, 1944, Admiral Ozawa orders his first search planes aloft. 7 float planes launch from cruisers and battleships, fanning out to locate the American fleet. This is already a critical mistake. 7 search planes to cover hundreds of square miles of ocean, compared to the over 30 American search aircraft systematically sweeping the Philippine Sea. Japanese reconnaissance, always a weakness, is about to fail catastrophically. At 0530, with his search planes still hours from reporting anything useful, Ozawa makes his second fateful decision. Believing the Americans are still beyond striking range and eager to catch them by surprise, he orders the launch of Raid 1, the first wave. 69 aircraft lift off from the 3 heavy carriers of Force A, 45 Zero fighters, 16 Yokosuka Judy dive bombers, and 8 Nakajima Jill torpedo bombers. They form up and head east toward where Ozawa believes the American carriers must be. But Ozawa's assumptions are dangerously wrong. The American carriers are not where he thinks they are. They are closer, much closer. And, far from being surprised, the Americans have been tracking his every move since his fleet left Tawi-Tawi. At 0559, radar aboard the American carriers detects Raid 1, while the Japanese aircraft are still 150 miles away. The warning goes out immediately across Task Force 58. All 15 carriers turn into the wind. Flight deck crews spring into action with practiced precision. One after another, Hellcats roar down flight decks and claw for altitude. Within minutes, over 220 Hellcats are airborne, climbing hard, vectored by radar controllers toward optimal interception positions. The Japanese pilots of Raid 1, most of them green recruits with minimal training, fly in loose formations toward where they believe the American fleet waits. Many are nervous, this being their first combat mission. Some pray quietly, others focus on their instruments, trying to maintain position in formation. None of them realize they are flying into a precisely coordinated ambush. At 0700 hours, the Hellcats strike. The American fighters, guided by radar controllers and positioned at superior altitude with the sun at their backs, plunge into the Japanese formations with devastating effect. The Hellcats, faster, better armed, and flown by experienced pilots, tear through the Japanese aircraft like sharks through a school of fish. Zeros, designed for maneuverability rather than durability, erupt into flames from short bursts of 50 caliber fire. Judy dive bombers, never meant for air-to-air combat, are shot down so quickly some pilots never see their attackers. Jill torpedo bombers, slow and cumbersome, become easy targets. Lieutenant Commander Charles Brewer, leading 1 Hellcat division, describes the engagement with clinical precision. We had altitude, we had speed, and we had them cold. They never had a chance. Our radar put us right where we needed to be. We came down out of the sun and just started shooting. Zeros burning, dive bombers spinning into the sea. It wasn't a dogfight, it was an execution. Of the 69 aircraft in Raid 1, only 27 survived to press their attack toward the American fleet. Those that do break through the fighter screen encounter something even more lethal. American anti-aircraft fire, coordinated by radar and using the proximity-fused shells, creates a wall of exploding steel. Japanese pilots who somehow survived the Hellcats now fly into a storm of shrapnel and blast. More aircraft tumble from the sky, trailing smoke and fire. At 0845, a single Judy dive bomber manages to reach the battleship South Dakota and score a near miss, causing minor damage. It is the only success Raid 1 achieves. Of the 69 aircraft that launched, fewer than 20 make it back to their carriers. 42 aircraft and their crews are simply gone, destroyed in less than an hour of combat. But Admiral Ozawa, still operating without reliable intelligence, does not know this. His radio receivers pick up excited chatter from his pilots. Fragmentary reports of attacks, explosions, fires. He assumes, incorrectly, that his first strike has achieved success. He orders Raid 2 to launch. At 0856, 128 aircraft lift off from carriers across the mobile fleet, 48 Zero fighters, 53 Judy dive bombers, and 27 Jill torpedo bombers. This is the largest strike Ozawa will launch all day. If anything can break through American defenses, this mass of aircraft should. But the same factors that doomed Raid 1 will destroy Raid 2. American radar picks up the formation at 0900 hours, while it is still 120 miles away. Again, Hellcats are vectored to intercept. Again, American fighters with altitude and position advantage slash into the Japanese formations. And again, the slaughter is one-sided and brutal. Zero pilots, many on their first combat mission, try to dogfight with Hellcats and discover their vaunted aircraft is no match for American speed, firepower, and pilot skill. The Judy and Jill bombers, stripped of fighter protection, are massacred. Lieutenant Alexander Vratiu, flying from USS Lexington, will later become the face of this battle. In just 8 minutes, he shoots down 6 Japanese aircraft, all dive bombers caught in a vulnerable position. His gun camera footage shows aircraft after aircraft disintegrating under his fire, wings folding, fuselages exploding, pilots desperately trying to bail out as their planes fall. Vratiu is not alone. All across the sky, similar scenes play out as over 400 Hellcats swarm the Japanese strike. Of Raid 2's 128 aircraft, 97 are destroyed. Only 31 survive, and most of those are too damaged or low on fuel to return to their carriers. They attempt to land at Guam, unaware that American fighters have been systematically destroying Japanese aircraft there all morning. Many are shot down attempting to land, others crash on the bomb-cratered runways. Perhaps 6 aircraft from Raid 2 make it back to the fleet. On the American side, losses are minimal. A few Hellcats shot down in combat, pilots rescued by destroyers. No ships hit, no significant damage. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, as American pilots are already calling it, is living up to its name. But the greatest catastrophe of the day is about to unfold, and it will not come from American aircraft at all. At 0809, as Raid 2 is forming up, the American submarine USS Albacore, commanded by Lieutenant Commander James Blanchard, achieves a firing position on the Japanese fleet. Through his periscope, Blanchard sees an enormous carrier turning into the wind to launch aircraft. It is Taiho, Admiral Ozawa's flagship, the newest and most powerful carrier in the Imperial Japanese Navy. Blanchard fires a spread of 6 torpedoes. 5 miss. 1 hits. A single torpedo, one Mark 14 warhead containing 670 pounds of explosive, strikes Taiho on the starboard side forward. The explosion tears a hole in the hull but appears to cause minimal damage. Damage control parties rush to the scene. The flooding is contained. Flight operations continue. Ozawa's staff barely reacts. The great armoured carrier seems to have shrugged off the attack. But beneath the waterline, aviation fuel lines have ruptured. High-octane gasoline begins seeping into compartments and voids throughout the ship. The volatile Tarakan crude oil being used as fuel makes the fumes even more dangerous. Normally, damage control teams would recognize this threat immediately and ventilate affected areas, venting the fumes overboard. But Taiho's damage control officer makes a fatal error. Believing the fumes can be dispersed internally, he orders the ship's ventilation system to maximum power. Instead of venting the fumes overboard, the ventilation system spreads them throughout the ship. Taiho becomes a floating bomb, her interior spaces saturated with gasoline vapor waiting for a spark. Hours pass. Ozawa launches Raid 3 at 1000 hours, 47 aircraft, and it is destroyed as completely as the first 2 waves. Only 7 planes return. He launches Raid 4 at 1100 hours, 82 aircraft, hoping land-based aircraft from Guam will join the attack. But the Guam-based planes have already been destroyed on the ground by American strikes. Raid 4 wanders across the Philippine Sea, unable to locate the American fleet, harassed by Hellcats, and eventually forced to land at Guam, where most are destroyed. Throughout these attacks, Taiho continues operating, launching and recovering aircraft, her crew unaware they are sailing aboard a bomb, ready to explode. At 15:32, 7 hours after the torpedo hit, an elevator operator in Taiho's hangar deck presses a button to bring an aircraft elevator up. From the hangar, the electric motor sparks. The spark ignites the gasoline-saturated air. The explosion is catastrophic. Taiho's entire hangar deck erupts in a massive fireball. The force of the blast blows out the sides of the ship. The armoured flight deck, designed to withstand bomb hits, buckles and tears from internal pressure. Secondary explosions rip through the carrier as aviation fuel tanks detonate. Within seconds, the pride of the Japanese fleet is transformed into a blazing wreck. Admiral Ozawa and his staff are forced to abandon ship, transferring to the destroyer Wakatsuki. From the destroyer's deck, they watch in horror as Taiho burns. Damage control is hopeless. The fires are too intense, the damage too severe. At 17:28, Taiho's captain, Kikuchi Tomeo, orders abandon ship. 20 minutes later, at 17:48, Taiho capsizes and sinks, taking 1,650 men with her. But the day's disasters are not finished. 65 miles to the southeast. At 12:20, the American submarine USS Kavala, commanded by Commander Herman Kostler, maneuvers into attack position on another Japanese carrier. Kostler, peering through his periscope, identifies the target as Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, Coral Sea, and countless battles. The carrier is actively conducting flight operations, launching and recovering aircraft, completely unaware of the submarine stalking her. Kostler fires 6 torpedoes. 3 hit Shokaku on the starboard side, tearing massive holes in her hull. Unlike Taiho's single hit, Shokaku's wounds are immediately fatal. Fuel lines rupture, flooding the ship with aviation gasoline. Fires break out instantly. The hangar deck, crowded with fueled and armed aircraft, becomes an inferno. Explosions tear through the ship as bombs and torpedoes detonate. Shokaku's experienced damage control teams fight desperately to save their ship, but the damage is too extensive. Fires rage out of control. The list increases. At 14:01, less than 2 hours after being torpedoed, Shokaku's captain orders abandon ship. 10 minutes later, at 14:10, a massive explosion tears Shokaku apart as her magazines detonate. She rolls over and sinks rapidly, taking 1,263 men with her, including Captain Hiroshi Matsubara, who chose to go down with his ship. In less than 3 hours, Admiral Ozawa has lost his 2 finest fleet carriers and his flagship, along with nearly 3,000 sailors. His carrier air groups have been decimated, with over 300 aircraft destroyed and hundreds of pilots dead. The mobile fleet, the last hope of Japanese naval aviation, has been gutted. That evening, Admiral Spruance, knowing the Japanese fleet is retreating westward, makes a controversial decision. Rather than pursuing aggressively into the night, risking his own carriers in uncertain conditions, he orders Task Force 58 to recover aircraft and maintain Posa's position near Saipan. The primary mission, protecting the invasion force, takes precedence over pursuing the damaged Japanese fleet. Some historians will criticize this decision, arguing that more aggressive pursuit might have destroyed the entire mobile fleet. Others will defend Spruance's caution, noting that his primary responsibility was to the Marines fighting on Saipan. But Admiral Mitchell, commanding Task Force 58, is not finished. On June 20th, American search planes finally locate Ozawa's retreating fleet at 1540, 275 miles from Task Force 58. It is late afternoon. Any attack will have to return after dark, a dangerous proposition that could cost many aircraft and pilots. Mitchell makes a bold decision: launch everything. At 1636, 216 American aircraft, Hellcat fighters, Helldiver dive bombers, and Avenger torpedo bombers lift off from 15 carriers and head west into the setting sun. The pilots know they are flying at extreme range. Many will not have enough fuel to return, but the chance to finish off the Japanese fleet is too important to miss. At 1840, the American strike finds the mobile fleet. Despite intense anti-aircraft fire and desperate defensive maneuvers by Japanese ships, American bombers press home their attacks with professional precision. The carrier Hio, already damaged earlier in the day, takes 2 torpedo hits and sinks at 20:05, taking 647 men with her. The carriers Zuikaku, Junyo, and Chiyoda are hit by bombs and heavily damaged. The battleship Haruna is damaged. 2 fleet oilers are sunk. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. 20 American aircraft are shot down during the attack, but the real challenge comes on the return flight. As darkness falls, one aircraft after another runs out of fuel. Engines sputter and die. Pilots ditch in the ocean, hoping for rescue. Of the 216 aircraft that launched, 116 make it back to the carriers. 100 are lost, most to fuel exhaustion rather than combat. In one of the most famous decisions of the Pacific War, Admiral Mitchell orders all ships in Task Force 58 to turn on their lights, illuminating the fleet like a city at night despite the risk of submarine attack. Searchlights sweep the sky. Flight decks are lit. Destroyers fire star shells to guide lost pilots home. The gamble works. Many pilots find the fleet and land, often on the wrong carrier, just glad to be alive. Others ditch nearby and are rescued. By the time recovery operations end at 2300 hours, 109 aircrewmen are in the water. Over the next several days, American destroyers and seaplanes conduct extensive search and rescue operations. 160 of the 185 downed airmen are eventually recovered. The contrast with Japanese rescue operations, which saved almost no one, is stark. On June 21st, with his fleet shattered and fuel running low, Admiral Ozawa receives orders from Admiral Toyoda to withdraw. The battle is over. The results are catastrophic for Japan. 3 carriers sunk: Taiho, Shokaku, and Hio. 2 carriers heavily damaged: Zuikaku and Junyo. 2 light carriers damaged: Chiyoda and another. Nearly 600 aircraft destroyed, 400 carrier-based and 200 land-based. Approximately 445 aviators killed, the last trained pilots Japan possessed. Over 3,000 sailors dead. The mobile fleet reduced to a hollow shell, carriers with no aircraft or pilots to fly them. American losses are comparatively minimal: 130 aircraft lost, most to fuel exhaustion rather than combat. 76 pilots and aircrew killed, no ships sunk, minor damage to a few vessels. The kill ratio is staggering: approximately 20 Japanese aircraft destroyed for every American plane lost in combat. But the numbers, however dramatic, do not fully capture the magnitude of Japan's defeat. The Battle of the Philippine Sea did not merely destroy ships and aircraft, it destroyed Japanese carrier aviation as an effective fighting force. The pilots killed in the battle were irreplaceable. Japan's pilot training program, already inadequate, could not produce new aviators fast enough to make up these losses. The carriers that survived had no trained air crews to fly from them. For the rest of the war, Japanese carriers will remain in port, useless hulks unable to project power. The strategic consequences are immediate and decisive. Without the threat of Japanese carrier air power, American forces secure Saipan after 3 weeks of brutal ground combat. From Saipan's airfields, B-29 superfortresses begin bombing the Japanese home islands in November 1944, burning Japanese cities and destroying Japanese industry. The capture of Tinian and Guam follows quickly, providing more bomber bases. The road to the Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and ultimately Japan itself lies open. In Tokyo, the news of the defeat is carefully concealed from the Japanese public. Official communiques claim a great victory, announcing the sinking of multiple American carriers that are, in fact, perfectly intact and operational. But within the Japanese government and military, the truth cannot be hidden. On July 18, 1944, Prime Minister Hideki Tojo resigns in disgrace, forced from power by the catastrophe in the Philippine Sea. His government, which promised victory, has delivered only defeat. For the sailors and pilots who survived the battle, the experience leaves deep psychological scars. Japanese survivors describe watching their carriers burn, hearing the screams of trapped shipmates, floating in the oil-slicked water praying for rescue that often never came. Many developed what we would now call post-traumatic stress, nightmares and survivor's guilt that haunted them for decades. Ensign Sakio Komatsu, one of the few pilots from Raid 1 to survive, later wrote about his experience. "I watched my friends die all around me, aircraft exploding, pilots burning in their cockpits, good men drowning in the sea. We were told our spirit would overcome American material strength. We were lied to. The Americans had better planes, better pilots, better tactics, better everything. We were sent to die in a battle we could not win. I survived, but I will never forgive those who sent us into that slaughter." American pilots, despite their overwhelming victory, often express a more somber view of the battle. Many witnessed the destruction of Japanese aircraft and understood they were killing young men, many barely trained, who never had a chance. Lieutenant Vrakiu, after shooting down 6 aircraft in 8 minutes, later reflected, "It was shooting practice, really. Those Japanese pilots didn't know what hit them. I felt sorry for them. They were brave men doing their duty, but they were hopelessly outmatched. War is terrible, even when you're winning." The few Japanese aircraft that managed to land at Guam during the battle discovered American fighters waiting for them. 1-0 pilot, Warrant Officer Fujita, described the scene. "We thought Guam would be safe. We were wrong. As we approached to land, American fighters were circling the field. They shot down plane after plane. I saw my friend Tanaka hit the ground and explode. I managed to land, but my plane was shot up. I hid in the jungle for 3 days before being captured. The Americans treated me better than my own officers ever did." The technological gap between the two sides, evident throughout the battle, reflects broader industrial realities. The United States in 1944 is producing aircraft at a rate Japan cannot match. American factories are turning out thousands of Hellcats, Corsairs, and bombers. American training programs are graduating thousands of pilots. American shipyards are launching new carriers faster than Japan can sink them. The material disparity that Admiral Yamamoto warned about before the war has become overwhelming. Japan's reliance on unrefined Tarakan crude oil, which contributed to Taiho's destruction, illustrates another critical weakness. American submarines have devastated Japan's tanker fleet, forcing the use of unrefined fuel direct from the wells. This volatile fuel increases the risk of fire and explosion, turning ships into death traps. It is yet another example of how Japan's industrial and logistical base cannot support sustained modern warfare. The radar advantage enjoyed by American forces proves decisive. Japanese aircraft, detected at extreme ranges, lose any element of surprise. American fighters, vectored by radar controllers, intercept at optimal positions with altitude and sun advantage. Japanese pilots, operating without comparable technology, fly blindly into ambushes they never see coming until too late. The contrast in rescue operations is particularly telling. American forces conduct extensive search and rescue, recovering most downed pilots. Japanese forces make minimal effort to rescue their own, leaving pilots to drown or be captured. This difference reflects broader cultural and operational priorities. American commanders view their pilots as valuable assets worth recovering. Japanese doctrine treats pilots as expendable. Over time, this difference compounds, with America building an increasingly experienced pilot corps, while Japan loses its best aviators permanently. The Battle of the Philippine Sea also demonstrates the importance of intelligence. American code-breaking and submarine reconnaissance provided Spruance and Mitchell with near-perfect knowledge of Japanese plans and movements. The Japanese, by contrast, operated in strategic blindness, unaware that their plans had been compromised, that their fleet was being tracked, or that their land-based air support had been destroyed. In modern warfare, information is power, and America's information dominance proved as decisive as its material superiority. For Admiral Ozawa, the defeat is professionally catastrophic but not career-ending. He will continue to command Japanese naval forces through the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, where his remaining carriers will serve as decoys, sacrificing themselves to draw American forces away from the main Japanese battleship force. It is a fitting end for ships that no longer have trained pilots to fly from them. Many of the American ships and pilots who fought at the Philippine Sea will be present at Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945, when Japan formally surrenders aboard the battleship USS Missouri. For them, the ceremony represents the culmination of a journey that truly began in the Philippine Sea, the moment when Japan's last hope of victory died and American victory became inevitable. The Battle of the Philippine Sea remains one of the most lopsided victories in naval history. Never before or since has one side achieved such overwhelming dominance in carrier warfare. It stands as testament to the importance of training, technology, tactics, and intelligence in modern combat. It demonstrates that courage alone, no matter how great, cannot overcome comprehensive disadvantage in preparation and material. For Japan, the battle represents the final shattering of imperial dreams. The vision of the Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere, of Japanese domination of the Pacific, dies in the flames of burning carriers and the wreckage of shattered aircraft. The Bushido spirit, the emphasis on fighting spirit over material preparation, is revealed as tragically inadequate against a modern, industrial, scientifically advanced enemy. The young pilots who flew into the guns of task, Force 58, deserved better than the leadership they received. They deserved honest assessment of their chances. They deserved adequate training. They deserved aircraft that could compete. They deserved commanders who understood the reality of industrial warfare. Instead, they received propaganda about spirit overcoming matter, obsolete aircraft, minimal training, and orders to attack a force that would destroy them with casual efficiency. In the years after the war, survivors from both sides occasionally met at reunions and commemorations. The conversations were often poignant. American and Japanese veterans, once mortal enemies, found common ground in their shared experience of combat and loss. Many Japanese veterans expressed admiration for American technology and organization. Many American veterans expressed respect for Japanese courage and sacrifice, even in a hopeless cause. The legacy of the Battle of the Philippine Sea extends beyond World War II. It established principles of carrier aviation that remain relevant today. Coordinated air defense, radar-controlled interception, fighter sweep tactics, and the importance of pilot training are all lessons demonstrated in the Philippine Sea and applied in subsequent conflicts. The battle proved that carrier aviation, properly employed with technological support and well-trained personnel, could dominate maritime warfare. The battle also marked a turning point in the Pacific War's psychological dimension. After the Philippine Sea, Japanese soldiers and sailors knew they were fighting a losing war. Morale plummeted. Desertion, previously rare, began to increase. The government's propaganda claims of victory rang hollow as the American advance continued unabated. The gap between official claims and observable reality destroyed trust in leadership. For the United States, the Philippine Sea confirmed that the strategy of island hopping, seizing key positions and bypassing others, supported by overwhelming carrier air power, would lead to victory. The successful invasion of Saipan, protected by Task Force 58, provided the blueprint for Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Each invasion brought American bombers closer to Japan, and each was made possible by the carrier force that had proven its dominance in the Philippine Sea. The ghosts of the battle remain. 3 Japanese carriers, Taiho, Shokaku, and Hio, rest on the bottom of the Philippine Sea, in waters thousands of feet deep. They are war graves, tombs for thousands of young men who believed they were fighting for their homeland and emperor. Occasionally, deep-sea explorers survey these wrecks, documenting the wreckage of Japan's imperial ambitions. The Battle of the Philippine Sea teaches a timeless lesson about modern warfare. Victory goes not to the bravest or most spiritually committed, but to those best prepared, best trained, best equipped, and best informed. Courage matters, but it cannot overcome systematic disadvantage across every dimension of combat. Japan's failure was not a failure of bravery. It was a failure of preparation, industrial capacity, technological development, and strategic realism. As the sun set on June 20th, 1944, it set not just on that day but on Japan's hopes of victory in the Pacific. The carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor, that had rampaged across Southeast Asia, that had threatened Australia and India, were gone. The pilots who had flown those missions were dead. The dream of empire was over. All that remained was the long, bloody road to surrender. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.